Hey guys. Tonight we drift back more than 4,000 years. To a quiet moment just before sunrise along the Nile. You wake slowly, not to an alarm, but to the low shuffle of reeds brushing against each other and the distant splash of water being scooped into clay jars. The air is cool, briefly kind before the sun decides to remind you who's in charge. Somewhere nearby, bread is already baking, a donkey snorts, and yes, your mouth aches just enough to make you aware of every heartbeat in your jaw. You probably won't survive this without complaining at least once. Because ancient Egypt is many things, but gentle on teeth is not always one of them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is awake, or pretending to be asleep, around the world right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise from a woven mat laid directly on the cool packed earth. The floor feels solid, reliable, and slightly gritty, which will become a recurring theme today. Sand is everywhere, it coats your feet, your food, and, most importantly for tonight's story, your teeth. This is a mainstream historical fact historians largely agree on. The Egyptian diet, rich in bread made from stone ground grain, was full of tiny mineral particles. Every loaf came with a complimentary side of sand. Whether you ordered it or not, you chew carefully, aware that every bite is slowly sanding your teeth down like driftwood. As you step outside, the Nile stretches before you, wide and patient, reflecting the pale pink of the early sky. This river dictates everything: work schedules, food supply, even medical practice. Dentists, such as they are, do not exist yet as a separate profession. Instead, healing is woven into daily life, handled by priest-physicians, herbalists, and practical craftsmen who know what works because they've watched it work, or at least watched people stop complaining afterward. Your jaw twinges again, a dull, persistent reminder that something is not quite right. Toothaches are common here, so common that nobody reacts with much alarm. Pain is inconvenient, yes, but expected. You are not special for having it, which is oddly comforting. Someone nearby mutters advice about chewing on certain plants. Another shrugs and says it will pass. The ancient equivalent of, have you tried turning it off and on again? The village stirs around you. Women head toward the river with jars balanced effortlessly on their heads. Farmers prepare tools for the fields before the heat becomes unbearable. Children run barefoot, their laughter light and short-lived before chores claim them. Dentistry, at this moment, feels far away, but it isn't. It's hiding in plain sight, embedded in routine. Here's a quirky tidbit that always surprises modern listeners. Ancient Egyptians cared deeply about cleanliness, including oral cleanliness. You watch someone rinse their mouth with water mixed with herbs, swishing thoughtfully before spitting into the dust. Tooth powders made from crushed stone, ash, and dried flowers exist, and yes, they are about as gentle as they sound. Imagine brushing with a substance that could double as sandpaper for furniture restoration. Your gums wince in sympathy. Historians still argue whether these early oral hygiene practices were meant to prevent decay or simply freshen breath for social and ritual reasons. Was it about health, or was it about not offending the gods and your neighbors with bad breath? The debate remains pleasantly unresolved, which feels appropriate for a civilization that loved both order and mystery. The sun creeps higher, warming the mud-brick walls of homes and temples. Your toothache pulses in time with the day beginning in earnest. This pain is not dramatic. It does not stop the world. Instead, it quietly shapes your choices. You chew more slowly. You avoid certain foods. You consider, with mild dread, the possibility of seeking treatment later. There is no anesthesia waiting for you. No modern dentist with soothing music and a tiny television mounted on the ceiling. There is, however, honey. But you are not there yet. First, you live this day. You walk through narrow paths between fields. The smell of wet earth mixing with the sharp scent of plants crushed underfoot. Work distracts you from discomfort, at least temporarily. This is another well-established historical reality. Life in ancient Egypt leaves little room for focusing solely on pain. Tasks demand attention. Crops must be tended. Tools must be maintained. Toothache becomes background noise, like the buzz of insects or the distant call of birds. At midday, you rest briefly in the shade. Someone shares food with you, bread, onions, maybe a bit of dried fish. You hesitate before biting, choosing the less painful side of your mouth. A neighbor notices and chuckles softly, offering a knowing nod. Everyone here has been through this. Tooth pain is almost a rite of passage, like learning to balance a basket or endure the summer heat without complaint. There's a gentle humor in how casually it's treated. One old man jokes that losing a tooth simply makes room for more wisdom, though you notice he avoids chewing entirely on one side. Another suggests prayer, which may or may not help but certainly doesn't hurt, unless you kneel too long on the stones. As afternoon stretches on, you hear murmurs about remedies. Honey mixed with crushed herbs. Pastes applied directly to the tooth. Words spoken softly while the mixture sets. Dentistry here is not isolated in a clinic, it's social, communal, passed down through observation and repetition. You file these ideas away, aware you may need them soon. When evening approaches, the light softens, casting long shadows across the fields. The heat releases its grip, and with it, your jaw relaxes slightly. Pain ebbs and flows, never fully gone, but quieter now. This daily rhythm, ache, distraction, mild relief, sets the stage for everything to come. You don't know it yet, but honey, rituals, and papyrus-written prescriptions are waiting just ahead, ready to enter your story. For now, you simply sit, watching the Nile darken under the fading sky. Tooth still aching, life still moving forward at an unhurried pace. Ancient dentistry hasn't announced itself yet, but it's already part of your day, quietly shaping how you eat, work, and rest. You move through the morning with that familiar, low-grade throb in your jaw, the kind that doesn't demand attention so much as constantly request it. Like a cat gently tapping your arm with its paw. The sun is higher now, bright and unapologetic, and the heat settles onto your shoulders as if it plans to stay all day, which, to be fair, it does. You walk carefully, not because of the path, but because each step seems to send a small reminder upward through your body, right into that sensitive tooth. Pain in ancient Egypt is not a dramatic event. It's not treated like an emergency unless blood or broken bones are involved. Toothaches live in a gray zone, annoying, persistent, but woven into daily existence. This is a mainstream historical understanding. Skeletal remains from Egypt show widespread dental wear and abscesses. Yet people continued to live long, productive lives. You're expected to carry on, so you do. You help with work, lifting, carrying, sorting, each task performed with a slightly clenched jaw. Dust rises around your feet, catching the light, and you taste grit in the air. Sand finds its way into everything here, including your mouth, and you briefly wonder if the environment itself is slowly conspiring against your teeth. Spoiler alert, it is. There's a moment, mid-morning, when you pause near the riverbank to drink. The water is cool, sweetened slightly by reeds and life unseen. You rinse your mouth, swishing gently, hoping for relief. For a few blessed seconds, the ache dulls, then it returns, unimpressed by your efforts. Still, that small ritual, drink, rinse, sigh, becomes a quiet coping mechanism, repeated throughout the day. Someone nearby notices your discomfort and offers advice with the confidence of someone who has absolutely no formal training but plenty of lived experience. Chew less, they suggest, which is deeply unhelpful but well-intentioned. Another recommends a paste made from crushed plants and oil. A third shrugs and says pain is part of being alive, which feels philosophically profound and emotionally unsatisfying all at once. Here's a quirky tidbit that often surprises people. Ancient Egyptians believed pain could sometimes be caused by tiny creatures or spirits inhabiting the body. Toothache, in this view, might not just be physical, it could be something living where it shouldn't. That idea makes the sensation feel oddly personal, like your tooth has developed opinions of its own. You briefly consider negotiating with it, then realize that's probably not how this works. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were taken literally or functioned more as metaphors to explain invisible processes. Were Egyptians imagining actual worms in teeth, or simply trying to describe decay in the language available to them? The debate lingers, much like your toothache, unresolved and mildly irritating. As the day wears on, you notice how others manage similar discomforts. A woman pauses to press a finger against her cheek, eyes closed for just a moment before resuming her task. A man chews slowly, methodically, favoring one side. Nobody complains loudly. There's a shared understanding that some pains are endured quietly, folded into routine. Lunch arrives without ceremony. Bread again. Always bread. Accompanied by vegetables and perhaps a small portion of meat if fortune smiles upon you today. You break the bread carefully, tearing it into manageable pieces. Each bite is deliberate, calculated to avoid that one spot. Eating becomes less about pleasure and more about strategy, which somehow makes it even more exhausting. You try to distract yourself by watching the river traffic, boats gliding past, sails catching the wind. Trade continues, indifferent to your discomfort. Life, you realize, does not pause for dental issues. This gentle indifference is oddly soothing. Your pain is not unique, not catastrophic. It is simply part of the texture of living here. There's a faint humor in the situation. 2. You imagine explaining your toothache to someone thousands of years in the future, complete with advanced dental technology, and feel mildly offended on behalf of your ancient self. No drills, no numbing injections, just patience and honey. Eventually, as afternoon approaches, the ache deepens, a reminder that ignoring it will only work for so long. You find yourself thinking more seriously about remedies you've heard mentioned in passing. Honey, herbs, words spoken carefully. Treatment here is not about eliminating pain instantly, it's about coaxing it into retreat. For now, though, you endure, you work, you drink, you rinse, you sigh. The sun begins its slow descent, and with it comes the promise of evening, and perhaps, finally, some attention to that stubborn tooth. The stage is set, pain has made itself known, and soon, someone will answer it. By late afternoon, you're no longer pretending the pain isn't there. It has matured, settled into something steady and opinionated. Like a neighbor who drops by unannounced and refuses to leave. You still work, still walk, still speak, but every action now includes a small mental calculation. Will this make the tooth angry? Ancient Egyptian life teaches you many skills, and pain management by distraction is apparently one of them. As the heat eases, you follow a narrow path toward a cluster of buildings set slightly apart from the busiest parts of the village. These are not hospitals in any modern sense. There are no signs, no waiting rooms, no clipboards. Healing here happens where knowledge happens, near temples, storerooms, and quiet shaded spaces where experience accumulates over generations. This is where you begin to understand who actually does dentistry in ancient Egypt. There is no single job title equivalent to dentist. Instead, care of the body, including teeth, falls to priest-physicians, men trained in ritual, observation, and practical remedies. This is a well-established historical fact. Medical practitioners in Egypt were often associated with temples, blending religious authority with hands-on treatment. If someone knows how to help your tooth, they likely also know how to read sacred texts and conduct offerings. You approach cautiously, half hoping no one notices you. Of course, someone does. They always do. A priest-physician looks up from grinding something in a stone bowl, eyes flicking briefly toward your face, then lingering just a bit longer on your jaw. Experience has made them perceptive. You don't need to explain. Your slightly tilted head and careful way of speaking have already told the story. Nearby, assistants move quietly, preparing mixtures, cleaning tools, organizing small bundles of herbs. The atmosphere is calm, almost sleepy. Despite the seriousness of the work, there's no urgency, no panic. Toothaches are common visitors here, familiar enough to earn routine rather than alarm. Here's a quirky tidbit that often gets overlooked. Some Egyptian medical practitioners specialized. Certain texts suggest there were individuals known for treating specific ailments, including teeth. While the idea of a full-time dentist is debated, there are references to those concerned with teeth, which is about as close as ancient Egypt gets to a business card. You imagine it reading, healer of teeth, also knows prayers. Historians still argue whether these were true specialists or simply general healers with particular experience. Did patients seek out tooth experts? Or did everyone just go to whoever seemed most confident that day? The records are frustratingly vague, leaving modern scholars to squint at hieroglyphs and debate tone. You sit, carefully, on a low stool. The stone beneath you is cool, grounding. The priest-physician asks simple questions: where it hurts, how long it's hurt, what makes it worse. There's no clipboard, but there is careful listening. Observation matters here. Your answers are considered alongside the condition of your gums, the smell of your breath, the way you react to gentle pressure. Diagnosis is slow, thoughtful, and surprisingly methodical. You notice tools laid out nearby. Nothing sharp yet, which you appreciate deeply. Small wooden sticks, stone grinders, linen cloths. This isn't about drilling or extracting unless absolutely necessary. Treatment begins conservatively. Ancient Egyptian medicine favors balance and gradual intervention. Jumping straight to extreme measures is frowned upon, partly due to belief, partly due to common sense. A light joke slips into the moment when another patient nearby mutters that at least tooth pain proves you're still alive. The healer smiles faintly but doesn't disagree. Humor exists here, soft and understated, even in discomfort. It helps. The healer mentions honey, almost casually, as if referring to something as ordinary as water. Your ears perk up. Honey is valuable, prized not just as food but as medicine. This is another mainstream historical fact. Honey was widely used in Egyptian treatments for its antibacterial and preservative properties. Even if they didn't describe it in those terms, they knew it worked. Experience had taught them that wounds treated with honey healed better. Teeth, it seems, were no exception. But not yet. First, preparation. You're told to return at a specific time. Once certain mixtures are ready. Treatment is rarely rushed. There are rituals to observe, proportions to measure, words to speak. Medicine here is not separate from belief, it's wrapped in it, cushioned by it. As you stand to leave, jaw still aching, you feel a strange sense of relief, not because the pain is gone, but because it's acknowledged. Someone has seen it, named it, and promised attention. In a world without instant fixes, that promise matters. You step back into the fading light, evening beginning to cool the air. Tomorrow, or perhaps even tonight, your tooth will meet honey, herbs, and ritual. For now, you carry the ache home, accompanied by the quiet confidence that people far older and wiser than you have dealt with this exact pain, in this exact place, many times before. You return as the light softens and the shadows lengthen. When the heat finally loosens its grip on the land, your jaw still aches, but now the pain feels scheduled, anticipated, like it knows it has an appointment. You step back into the shaded space where tools rest patiently, laid out with care, as if they too are waiting for you. This is where you really notice them, the tools. Not dramatic, not frightening, just quietly present. Ancient Egyptian dental work relies on simplicity and repetition rather than complexity. A stone mortar sits at the center, its surface worn smooth from years of grinding minerals and plants. Wooden spatulas lie nearby, darkened with age and use. Linen strips are folded neatly, soft and clean. Everything here has a purpose, and nothing looks hurried. This aligns with a mainstream historical fact. Egyptian medical practice emphasized preparation. Recipes mattered, measurements mattered. Many remedies were recorded in medical papyri, suggesting that healers followed established formulas rather than improvising wildly. You're oddly comforted by this. There's something reassuring about knowing your toothache is being addressed with a recipe older than most civilizations. The healer begins grinding ingredients with slow, steady movements. The sound is rhythmic, stone against stone, almost meditative. You find yourself relaxing despite the situation, shoulders dropping as the repetitive motion fills the space. Someone nearby murmurs a light joke about how grinding remedies is harder work than grinding grain, earning a few soft chuckles. Even here, humor sneaks in gently. You catch glimpses of the ingredients as they're added. Minerals first, fine powders that catch the light, then dried plant matter, crushed carefully. These substances are not chosen randomly. Experience has taught which plants soothe, which sting, which numb just enough to take the edge off pain. There's no chemical analysis, no microscopes, but there is memory, passed down carefully. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tooth treatments included ingredients that today seem more symbolic than practical, things like incense ash or specific resins associated with purification. Their inclusion may not have had a direct medical effect, but they mattered psychologically. Treatment here aims to calm the body and the mind. Pain is physical, yes, but belief shapes how it's felt. Historians still argue whether these symbolic ingredients contributed indirectly by encouraging relaxation and trust, which in turn reduced perceived pain. Was it placebo, or simply an early understanding that comfort matters? The debate continues quietly, much like the grinding in front of you. You watch the healer test the mixture between fingers, adjusting texture with practiced ease. Too dry, and it won't adhere. Too wet, and it won't stay where it's needed. Precision here is tactile, intuitive. No one checks a scale. They check feel, smell, and consistency. It's craftsmanship as much as medicine. Nearby, you notice other tools that hint at less pleasant possibilities, thin metal probes. Small hooks. They remain untouched for now, which you deeply appreciate. Extraction exists in ancient Egypt, but it's a last resort. Teeth are valuable. Losing one affects eating, speaking, and status. Preservation is always preferred. The healer finally looks at you and nods. Not yet, but soon. The mixture needs to settle. You're encouraged to sit quietly, to breathe, to let your body ease. You comply, partly because it seems wise and partly because standing makes your jaw throb more. As you wait, you think about how different this feels from modern medicine. There's no rushing you through. No sense that your pain is an inconvenience. Time is built into the process. Waiting is part of healing here, whether you like it or not. When you eventually leave, the mixture is covered, set aside, protected from dust. Honey has not yet entered the scene, but it's close. You can almost smell it nearby, sweet and faint in the warm air. Tomorrow, or perhaps later tonight, it will take center stage. You step out into the deepening evening. Tooth still aching but spirit oddly calmer. Preparation is underway. The tools are ready, and for the first time all day, you feel like the pain might not win this round. You return when the air smells faintly sweet, and you realize it before you even see it. Honey has entered the room. It sits in a small ceramic vessel, thick and golden, catching what little light remains like something alive and patient. This is not a luxury item today. This is medicine, and somehow, that makes it feel more serious than if it were locked away for royalty. The healer lifts the vessel carefully, as if greeting an old colleague. Honey is familiar here, trusted. This is a mainstream historical fact that scholars largely agree on. Ancient Egyptians used honey extensively in medical treatments, especially for wounds and infections. They didn't know about bacteria in the modern sense, but they knew outcomes. Honey-treated injuries festered less. They healed more cleanly. People complained less afterward, which is always a strong endorsement. You sit again, jaw tight, watching as the honey is combined with the prepared paste. The sound is slow and sticky, a soft pulling noise as the mixture thickens. It smells comforting, warm, floral, reassuring in a way that feels almost unfair given what it's about to be used for. You briefly wonder why all medicine doesn't smell like this. Here's a quirky tidbit that still fascinates researchers. Egyptian honey was sometimes infused with specific herbs or resins. Not just for flavor or symbolism, but possibly to enhance its effect. Some of those additives had mild antiseptic or anti-inflammatory properties. Others might just have been there because someone's grandmother swore by them. Both approaches coexist peacefully here. The healer explains, calmly, that honey helps protect. It coats, it seals. When applied to a painful tooth or sore gum, it creates a barrier against corruption, which is their word for decay and infection. You nod, not entirely sure what corruption means in this context, but fully on board with anything that sounds like it keeps things from getting worse. Historians still argue whether Egyptians understood honey's antibacterial properties in a practical, observational way or attributed its effectiveness to divine favor. Was honey medicine because it worked, or because it was sacred? Possibly both. The line between science and belief here is less a line and more a gentle blur. The application itself is surprisingly gentle. A small wooden stick delivers the paste directly to the problem area. There is pressure, yes, and a brief, sharp reminder of why you're here, but no sudden violence. No shocking sensations, just a careful placement, followed by a pause. You are instructed not to chew, not to speak much, and definitely not to poke at it with your tongue, which immediately becomes your tongue's only goal in life. Someone nearby makes a soft joke about honey being too good for teeth. Considering how hard teeth work, you would laugh, but you're afraid it might dislodge the treatment. So you smile internally, which you assume counts. As the paste settles, something unexpected happens. The pain doesn't vanish, but it changes. It dulls, smoothing out around the edges. The ache becomes less sharp, more distant. It's still there, but it no longer demands your full attention. This is another historical reality reflected in medical texts. Many Egyptian remedies aimed not at instant cure, but at managing symptoms. Relief, even partial, was considered success. You're told to keep the mixture in place as long as possible. Hours, If you can manage it, overnight would be ideal. This is medicine that works slowly, patiently, like everything else here. You nod again, fully aware that sleep with something stuck to your tooth will be an experience. There's a small ritual that accompanies the treatment. Words are spoken softly, not loudly, not dramatically. They're more like reminders than spells, asking for balance, protection, calm. You're not sure whether they're meant for you, the honey, or whatever might be causing the pain, possibly all three. This blend of practical treatment and spoken ritual is deeply characteristic of Egyptian medicine. Healing addresses the body and the unseen forces around it. Pain is not just physical, it's part of a larger imbalance. Even if you're skeptical, you can't deny the effect of being cared for in this way. It calms you, and calmer people tend to hurt less, which feels like an ancient life hack. As evening deepens, you're sent home with instructions. Avoid hard food, avoid chewing on that side. Return if the pain worsens. Return anyway, actually, because follow-up matters. This continuity of care is another well-supported historical fact. Egyptian medical practice often involved repeated applications rather than one-time interventions. You walk slowly, savoring the cool air. The honey's sweetness lingers faintly, mixing with dust and night scents. Your jaw feels heavy but steadier, like something has finally been acknowledged and addressed properly. You catch yourself feeling oddly grateful to bees you will never see. At home, you settle in carefully, arranging yourself to avoid pressure on your jaw. Sleep comes slowly, but when it does, it's deeper than you expected. Pain no longer sits in the foreground. It hums softly somewhere else, like background noise you've learned to ignore. Tomorrow will tell you more, but tonight, honey has done its quiet work, not miraculously, not instantly, but gently, and in ancient Egypt, gentle progress is often the best kind. You wake before sunrise, not because you're fully rested, but because your body has decided that this is simply what it does now. The mat beneath you is cool, the air still faintly sweet with night, and for a brief, disorienting moment, you forget about your tooth entirely. Then you swallow, and there it is. Not sharp, not angry, just present, a low murmur instead of yesterday's argument. You consider this a small victory. The honey mixture has held through the night better than you expected. It hasn't magically cured anything, but it has created a sense of stability, like a truce between you and your jaw. This aligns neatly with a mainstream historical understanding. Many Egyptian treatments were designed to protect and stabilize rather than aggressively eliminate a problem. Medicine here often works by buying time. You rise carefully, resisting the urge to poke at the treated tooth with your tongue. This takes impressive restraint. Outside, the village stirs again, repeating its rhythms with comforting predictability. Bread is baked, water is drawn, sand resumes its quiet campaign against everything it touches. Later in the morning, you return to the healer, as instructed. There's no sense of impatience or judgment when you arrive, just recognition. Follow-up is expected. This is not a one-off encounter, it's an ongoing relationship between patient, practitioner, and problem. Today, you notice papyrus scrolls resting nearby. Some are unrolled slightly, revealing neat columns of writing. These are not decorative, they're functional. This is another well-supported historical fact. Ancient Egyptian medical knowledge was recorded in texts such as the Ebers Papyrus, which includes remedies for dental pain. Written medicine exists here, not as theory, but as instruction. The healer consults one scroll briefly, tracing a line with a finger. You don't understand the words, but you understand the intent. This remedy has been used before, many times. There is comfort in repetition. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some dental prescriptions combined honey with substances that sound questionable to modern ears, like powdered minerals or plant ash. While some of these ingredients may have helped reduce inflammation or dry excess moisture, others probably did very little beyond thickening the paste. And yet, they were included faithfully, because tradition carries weight. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these recipes depended more on their active ingredients or on the consistency with which they were applied. Was it the honey doing most of the work, or the discipline of repeated care? The answer, inconveniently, may be both. The healer inspects your tooth again, gently. There is no probing for the sake of it, no unnecessary discomfort. They note the reduced swelling, the calmer reaction to pressure. This observation-based approach is central to Egyptian medicine. Treatments are adjusted not by theory alone, but by watching what happens. A fresh application is prepared. Slightly altered in texture, the honey is warmed just enough to flow more smoothly. The smell is richer this time. Deeper. You find it oddly soothing, which feels like something you should maybe keep to yourself. Another light joke drifts through the space. Someone remarks that bees must be the hardest working healers in Egypt. No one disagrees. You exhale softly through your nose, which you decide counts as laughter under the circumstances. The paste is applied again, and again the pain shifts rather than disappears. It retreats a little further, as if reconsidering its position. You're reminded that healing here is incremental. Progress is measured in degrees, not dramatic turnarounds. Before you leave, the healer gives you advice that sounds almost modern. Avoid irritating the area. Keep it clean, and return if things change. There is no promise of perfection, only management, only care. As you step back into the sun, jaw steadier than yesterday, you realize something important. Ancient dentistry is not about conquering pain. It's about living alongside it, reducing its impact, and trusting slow methods over force. It's not glamorous, it's practical, and, surprisingly, it works well enough to let life continue. You head back to your day, chewing cautiously, thinking quietly, feeling just a bit more at ease than before. By the time the sun begins its slow descent again, the ache in your jaw has settled into something almost polite. It's still there, of course. Ancient Egypt does not hand out miracles lightly, but the pain no longer interrupts your thoughts every few moments. Instead, it waits its turn, like someone who has accepted they will be dealt with eventually. You consider this an upgrade. You return for the evening treatment as part of the routine now. No announcement, no urgency, just a quiet understanding that this is how healing happens, step by step. Layer by layer, the healer greets you with a nod that suggests progress has been noticed. That nod carries more comfort than any dramatic reassurance could. Tonight, the ritual is slightly different. Not radically. Egyptian medicine does not reinvent itself daily, but refined. The honey mixture is prepared again, but this time accompanied by softly spoken words meant to encourage balance and calm. These are not shouted incantations. They're murmured reminders, almost meditative, and they match the slow pace of the work. This blending of spoken ritual with physical treatment is a mainstream historical reality. Medical texts show that remedies were often paired with words to be spoken during application. Healing addressed both the visible and invisible aspects of illness. Pain, after all, is not just a physical sensation, it lives in the mind as well. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of these spoken phrases were so specific that they named body parts directly, addressing them as if they could listen. Teeth included. You imagine your tooth being politely asked to behave. And while that sounds amusing, you can't deny that the calm repetition of words does something to your breathing. Your shoulders relax, your jaw unclenches slightly, the body responds even if the mind is skeptical. Historians still argue whether these spoken components were meant to invoke divine assistance or simply focus the patient's attention away from pain. Were they prayers, psychological tools, or both? As usual, ancient Egypt refuses to choose just one explanation. The application is careful, practiced. The healer uses a linen strip this time, gently positioning it to help keep the mixture in place longer. Linen is everywhere here. Clean, reliable, breathable, and its use in medical settings is well documented. You feel oddly wrapped, supported, like your tooth has been tucked in for the night. Someone nearby makes a light comment about how much effort goes into calming one small part of the body. Another replies that small parts cause the loudest complaints. You silently agree. Tooth pain has a talent for announcing itself. Afterward, you're encouraged to sit quietly for a while, letting the treatment settle. No rushing back to work. No immediate testing of whether it worked. Patience is part of the medicine. You sit, listening to distant evening sounds, footsteps, low voices, the faint call of birds preparing for night. And something happens, not dramatically, not suddenly, but the pain softens further, easing into the background like a sound you only notice when it stops. You become aware of how tense you've been all day, and how that tension has slowly unraveled without you quite realizing it. This gradual relief aligns with what we know from historical records. Egyptian dental care was about managing discomfort over time, not erasing it instantly. Treatments were repeated, adjusted, and reinforced through routine. Consistency mattered more than intensity. As night fully settles, You make your way home again. Jaw steady, thoughts slower. You eat carefully, choosing softer foods, chewing with intention rather than hunger. The honey's sweetness lingers faintly, mixed now with the calm that comes from being tended to. You lie down later, listening to the familiar night sounds, and realize that for the first time since this began, sleep doesn't feel like something you'll have to negotiate for. It simply arrives, unhurried. Ancient dentistry, you're learning, works quietly. It doesn't announce victories. It just makes tomorrow a little easier than today. You wake later than usual, which feels like a small luxury. The sun has already climbed, light spilling into your space with a confidence that suggests the day is well underway without you. For a moment, you lie still, taking inventory, back, legs, shoulders. Then, cautiously, your jaw. The ache is there, but it's muted, like a memory rather than an alarm. You almost smile, then think better of it, just in case. This is the point where hope creeps in. Quietly, carefully. You've been disappointed by pain before, and you're not eager to jinx things. Still, it's hard not to notice the difference. The honey, the rituals, the repeated care, they've changed something. Maybe not cured, but shifted, and in ancient Egypt, that counts. You go about your morning with slightly more confidence. You chew more evenly, though still with caution. Food tastes better when you're not bracing for discomfort. And you hadn't realized how much energy pain had been quietly stealing from you. This aligns with a mainstream historical observation. Even partial pain relief in ancient contexts dramatically improved daily function. When survival depends on routine work, small improvements matter a great deal. As you move through the village, you overhear conversations about remedies. Someone discusses a sore joint eased by oils. Another mentions a wound that healed cleanly thanks to honey and linen. There's a shared language of care here, a communal understanding that bodies wear down and must be maintained thoughtfully. Dentistry is simply part of that broader system. Here's a quirky tidbit that adds texture to the moment. Some ancient remedies were evaluated by how quickly pain returned after treatment stopped. If discomfort stayed away longer each time, the treatment was considered effective. There were no charts, no numerical scales, just lived experience measured over days and nights. You realize you're doing the same thing now, mentally tracking the intervals between twinges. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians conceptualized healing as a linear process or a cyclical one. Did they expect steady improvement? Or did they accept flare-ups as natural setbacks? The evidence suggests a practical acceptance of both. Bodies improve, regress, and improve again. Healing is not a straight line, and nobody here seems bothered by that. Later, you return for another check, not because the pain is unbearable, but because follow-up has become part of your rhythm. The healer examines the area again, noting the reduced sensitivity. There's a small nod, approval, maybe, or simply acknowledgement. Adjustments are made, less paced this time, a sign, perhaps, that things are moving in the right direction. A light joke slips out of someone nearby about how the tooth is finally learning its place. You appreciate the humor, even if you're not convinced your tooth has learned anything at all. Still, laughter comes easier now, and that feels significant. As evening approaches, you notice how the pain behaves differently. It no longer dominates the quiet moments. It doesn't grow louder when you stop moving. Instead, it fades along with the day, content to let you rest. You lie down later, breathing slowly, feeling the world narrow gently around you. Relief hasn't arrived with trumpets or declarations. It's arrived like dusk, gradual, almost unnoticed until it's fully there. And in that softness, you understand something ancient practitioners likely understood well. Healing doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. By now, the pain has changed personalities entirely. It's no longer the demanding presence it once was. Instead, it behaves more like a distant relative, still technically part of your life, but no longer calling every hour to remind you of its existence. You notice it mostly when you don't notice it, which feels like a strange but welcome development. Your daily routine settles back into something closer to normal, and with that comes a renewed awareness of how people here care for their mouths when they're not in pain. Dentistry in ancient Egypt isn't only reactive, it's preventative, habitual, and quietly embedded in everyday life. In the morning, you watch people tend to their teeth as naturally as they wash their hands. Rinsing with water is common, sometimes mixed with crushed herbs or salt. Chewing sticks, small twigs from aromatic plants, are used to scrub teeth and freshen breath. This is a mainstream historical fact. Early forms of toothbrush-like tools existed in Egypt, long before modern bristles ever appeared. You try one yourself, cautiously. The stick tastes sharp and planty, and while it's not exactly pleasant, it does leave your mouth feeling cleaner. There's a rhythm to the motion, slow and deliberate, no aggressive scrubbing, no rushing, just gentle maintenance. You find it oddly calming, like caring for something fragile but important, which, considering recent events, feels accurate. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tooth powders included ingredients like crushed eggshells or pumice. Yes, pumice. It's effective at removing buildup, but also extremely abrasive. You imagine modern dentists collectively wincing across time. Still, people used what they had, and what they had was stone, ash, and a remarkable tolerance for mild discomfort. Historians still argue whether these abrasive powders caused more harm than good over time. Did they clean teeth effectively? Or did they accelerate wear? The answer likely depends on frequency and technique. Details lost to time. What remains clear is that Egyptians valued clean mouths enough to accept a certain trade-off. As the day goes on, you realize how much social interaction revolves around eating, speaking, and ritual recitation. Teeth matter not just for survival, but for participation. Being able to speak clearly during prayers, to eat without grimacing, to smile without pain. These are small things that add up to dignity. You return briefly to the healer, not for treatment this time, but for guidance. Maintenance advice is offered freely. Rinse, avoid irritating foods, return if discomfort returns. There's no sense of dependency being encouraged. The goal is self-sufficiency, supported by community knowledge. Someone nearby jokes that good teeth keep you out of trouble with both gods and dinner companions. You silently agree. Bad breath alone could probably cause social exile here. As evening falls, you reflect on how much attention has been paid to something so small. A single tooth has shaped your days, your movements, your thoughts, and yet, care for it has been thoughtful, patient, and communal. No heroics, no drama, just steady attention. You lie down that night with a calm jaw and a quieter mind. The ache is now a faint echo, barely worth acknowledging. You breathe slowly, grateful not just for the relief, but for the rhythm of care that made it possible. As your days settle into something almost ordinary again, you begin to notice how uneven the experience of tooth pain, and its treatment, can be depending on who you are. Ancient Egypt may feel timeless and balanced from a distance, but up close, class quietly shapes everything, including dentistry. You start to see it in small ways, the kind that only stand out once you're no longer distracted by your own aching jaw. You watch workers in the fields chew quickly, efficiently, often favoring one side of their mouths. Their food is coarse, practical, and eaten with little ceremony. Bread, onions, beer, fuel more than pleasure. Tooth pain here is endured, managed just enough to keep working. Seeking treatment is possible, but time away from labor has consequences. You understand now why many people wait until pain becomes impossible to ignore. This fits a mainstream historical understanding. While medical knowledge existed, access to practitioners varied by status. Elite households had easier, more frequent access to priest-physicians and remedies. Laborers relied more heavily on household knowledge, shared recipes, and tolerance. Dentistry, like most care, was shaped by economics even then. You notice how differently nobles eat. Softer foods, better milling, less grit. Their bread still contains sand. No one escapes that entirely, but in smaller amounts. Their tooth wear is slower, their complaints quieter. They have the luxury of prevention rather than reaction, which feels unfair in a way that transcends time. Here's a quirky tidbit that highlights the contrast. Some elite individuals were buried with cosmetic dental work, including attempts to stabilize loose teeth with gold wire. It wasn't common, and it wasn't purely functional. It also signaled status. You imagine the quiet pride of someone knowing their smile was literally held together with precious metal. Historians still argue whether such dental modifications were intended primarily for comfort or appearance. Were these early dental appliances meant to reduce pain, or simply to preserve dignity in life and death? The answer, as always, likely lies somewhere in between. You also notice gender differences. Women, often responsible for food preparation and household remedies, tend to know more about everyday dental care. They share tips quietly: what to chew, what to rinse with, when honey helps and when it doesn't. This informal knowledge network operates alongside formal medicine, filling gaps where access is limited. There's a quiet humor in how everyone adapts. A man jokes that missing teeth make it easier to whistle. A woman laughs that tooth pain excuses you from certain chores. Pain becomes something to negotiate with, not just suffer through. As evening approaches, you reflect on how your own experience has been shaped by circumstance. You had access, you had time, you were noticed. Others endure longer, complain less, and adapt more. Dentistry here is not equal, but it is resilient. You lie down that night thinking about all the mouths around you, each carrying its own quiet stories of wear, pain, and care. Your jaw feels calm, steady, almost trustworthy again, and as sleep begins to pull you under, you realize that relief, like so much else in ancient Egypt, depends not just on knowledge, but on who gets to use it. With your own tooth no longer demanding constant attention, your awareness drifts outward. You start noticing other mouths, other habits, other accents carried on the warm air. Ancient Egypt is not as isolated as it sometimes appears in quiet nighttime documentaries. Travelers pass through constantly, merchants, messengers, sailors, bringing goods, stories, and, inevitably, toothaches. You encounter them near the river and along trade routes, Nubian traders with goods from the south, Levantine merchants with unfamiliar spices, sailors who smell faintly of salt and sun. They speak differently, dress differently, and yet when they chew, they do so with the same careful caution you recognize immediately. Tooth pain, it turns out, is a universal language. This reflects a mainstream historical fact. Egypt sat at the center of vast trade networks connecting Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean. With trade came shared knowledge, including medical ideas. Remedies traveled just as goods did, exchanged casually in conversation or deliberately between healers. You overhear discussions about treatments used elsewhere. Someone mentions plant resins favored in the Levant. Another talks about oils used farther south. Honey appears again and again, cropping up in stories from different lands, which quietly reinforces its reputation. You begin to realize that while cultures differ, effective remedies tend to converge. Here's a quirky tidbit that adds texture to these exchanges. Some travelers believed certain toothaches were caused by environmental changes, new water, unfamiliar air, foreign spirits displeased by outsiders. Remedies, therefore, sometimes included acclimation rituals as much as physical treatment. You imagine your tooth protesting travel conditions like an offended bureaucrat. Historians still argue how much cross-cultural medical knowledge truly influenced Egyptian practice. Did healers actively adopt foreign methods? Or did they simply reinterpret them through local beliefs? Evidence suggests a mix of both. Useful ideas stuck, others were politely acknowledged and quietly ignored. One evening, you sit near a small group sharing food and stories. A merchant describes a healer in another land who used heated metal near the jaw, not touching, just close enough to draw out pain. You instinctively flinch at the description, then feel grateful for honey and linen. Ancient dentistry offers many paths, not all of them comforting. Despite differences, the shared experience of pain creates an odd sense of camaraderie. People trade coping strategies with gentle humor. Someone jokes that no matter where you go, teeth always know how to ruin the trip. Laughter follows, soft and knowing. You reflect on how these conversations broaden your understanding. Dentistry is not a static body of knowledge here. It's fluid, shaped by movement and exchange. What works stays, what doesn't fades quietly. As night settles again, you feel grateful for the particular version of care you've received. Others have different tools, different beliefs, different thresholds, yet everyone shares the same basic goal: to eat, speak, and rest without constant discomfort. You lie down listening to distant voices fade, thinking about how something as small as a tooth connects people across cultures. Pain travels, relief travels, and in ancient Egypt, honey happens to be one of the things that sticks around. As days pass without the sharp return of pain, you start thinking less about your tooth and more about why the treatment worked at all. Not in a modern, analytical way. There's no chart or hypothesis forming in your mind, but in the slow, reflective manner that comes when discomfort loosens its grip. You begin to notice how seamlessly belief and observation intertwine here, especially in medicine. In ancient Egypt, there is no clean boundary between magic and science. They are not opposing forces. They are collaborators. This is a mainstream historical understanding supported by medical papyri, which regularly combine practical instructions with spoken formulas. A remedy is incomplete without both parts. You don't question this now. You felt the calm that accompanies the words. The way your body softened even before the honey touched your tooth. You sit quietly near the healer one afternoon, watching others receive care. Each treatment begins with attention, focused, deliberate. Then comes the substance, paste, oil, honey, and finally, words, not shouted, not theatrical, just spoken with certainty. The cadence is steady, reassuring, almost hypnotic. You notice patients breathing more slowly by the end. Their faces softer, their shoulders lower. Here's a quirky tidbit that still intrigues scholars. Some spells were written in the first person from the perspective of the ailment itself. Commanding it to leave, toothache, in these texts, is addressed directly, as if it has agency. You imagine your own pain being politely, but firmly, asked to pack up and move along. Strangely, it feels less ridiculous than it sounds. Historians still argue whether these spoken components were primarily symbolic or whether they functioned as early forms of psychological therapy. Did they reduce pain by altering perception, lowering stress, and encouraging trust in the healer? Or were they believed to have direct supernatural force? The honest answer is that ancient Egyptians likely didn't see a difference worth arguing over. What matters is outcome. People feel better. You felt better. The honey protected. The words soothed. Together, they formed a complete response to pain, one that acknowledged both the physical sensation and the fear that came with it. You also realize how much authority plays a role. The healer's confidence matters. Their calm certainty communicates safety. This is another subtle but important historical reality. Trust was a critical component of ancient medical practice. A healer's reputation, demeanor, and connection to the divine all influenced how treatments were received. Someone nearby makes a gentle joke about how even pain listens better when spoken to politely. You almost laugh out loud, then decide against tempting fate. Still, the humor lingers, lightening the mood. As evening falls, you reflect on how different this feels from modern expectations. There's no demand for proof in the way you might expect today. Instead, there's attention, repetition, and belief reinforced by experience. If something helps consistently, it becomes truth enough. You lie down that night with a quiet jaw and a quieter mind. The ache is now barely a whisper, easily ignored, and as sleep settles in, you understand something ancient healers likely understood well. Healing is as much about how you feel being treated as it is about what's applied. By now, your tooth has faded into the background so completely that you almost forget it was ever the center of your days. Almost. It still makes itself known occasionally. A faint reminder when you chew something too hard or yawn a little too widely, but it no longer controls you. Instead, your attention drifts towards something quieter and more enduring, what remains after everyone else is gone. Long after villages empty and voices fade, teeth endure. This is where archaeology enters the story. Softly but persistently, ancient Egyptian teeth, preserved in tombs and burial sites, have given modern scholars an unusually intimate look into everyday life. This is a mainstream historical fact. Dental remains are among the most informative biological evidence from ancient Egypt, revealing diet, health, and patterns of wear with remarkable clarity. You imagine yourself far in the future now, reduced to bone and memory, your teeth still carrying the story of bread, sand, and honey. Archaeologists examine molars worn nearly flat, enamel ground down by years of gritty meals. They find abscesses that healed and others that didn't. Some teeth show signs of intervention, packed cavities, residues consistent with plant-based or honey mixtures. Quiet proof that care was attempted. Here's a quirky tidbit that tends to surprise people, in some cases. Ancient teeth show evidence of survival after serious dental infections. Bone growth indicates the body adapted, contained the problem, and carried on. People lived with chronic dental issues for years. This resilience reshapes how you imagine ancient pain, not as constant agony, but as something managed, negotiated, and folded into life. Historians still argue about how widespread effective dental treatment truly was. Did most people receive care? Or are we seeing exceptional cases preserved by chance? The archaeological record is uneven, and conclusions shift with each new discovery. Teeth, it turns out, are honest but not always complete storytellers. You think back to the honey, the linen, The words spoken softly in the evening light. Archaeology can't hear those words. It can't record comfort, patience, or reassurance. It can only hint, through residue and wear, that someone tried. Someone cared enough to apply a mixture, to repeat a treatment, to hope for relief. There's a strange comfort in that. Even stripped of names and stories, these remains suggest attention rather than neglect. Dentistry here was imperfect, limited by tools and knowledge, but it existed. Pain was not ignored entirely. It was addressed with what was available. As night settles again, you lie down thinking about how much of life passes quietly, leaving only subtle traces behind. Your tooth, calm and steady now, feels like a small echo of that continuity. Care happened, healing happened, enough to matter, and sometimes, enough is everything. You don't feel the tooth much at all now. When it does make itself known, it's more like a gentle tap on the shoulder than a grab at the collar. And with the pain mostly quiet, your mind does what it always does in the absence of urgency. It starts to wonder. Not sharply, not critically, just softly, the way thoughts drift when you're half rested and unbothered. This is where historians enter the room, tiptoeing in centuries later, peering over the shoulders of ancient healers and trying to decide what exactly was going on. Ancient Egyptian dentistry leaves behind enough evidence to be convincing, but not enough to be definitive. That uncertainty has kept scholars politely arguing for generations. This is a mainstream historical reality. While we have medical papyri, skeletal evidence, and material residues, we lack patient voices. We don't know how people felt about these treatments in their own words. We infer outcomes from bones and texts, but the lived experience, relief, disappointment, trust, is something we can only imagine. Some historians argue that honey-based dental treatments were genuinely effective at controlling infection and reducing pain. From a modern perspective, that makes sense. Honey's antibacterial properties are now well documented. Others caution against overconfidence, suggesting that many cases may have improved on their own, with honey simply coinciding with natural healing. Both views coexist comfortably, like neighbors who wave but never fully agree. Here's a quirky tidbit that fuels the debate. Chemical analysis of residues found in ancient teeth has occasionally detected substances consistent with medicinal pastes, but not always in amounts that guarantee effectiveness. Was the paste applied briefly, repeatedly? Was it symbolic more than practical? The answers shift depending on who you ask. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian dental care should be viewed as surprisingly advanced or simply competent within its limitations. Was it an early form of scientific medicine, or a well-organized system of trial and error wrapped in belief? The argument often says more about modern expectations than ancient intentions. You find yourself siding gently with practicality. The people you've observed didn't need perfection. They needed relief that lasted long enough to work, eat, sleep, and pray, and by that standard, ancient dentistry seems to have done its job reasonably well. There's a quiet humility in that realization. Not everything needs to be optimal to be meaningful. Not every treatment needs to cure to be worth doing. Care itself carries weight. As evening arrives, you feel calm, reflective, and unhurried. Your jaw rests easily, your thoughts slow. The debates of scholars fade into background murmurs. Interesting but no longer urgent. What matters now is that the pain is quiet, and the night is gentle. You settle in, breathing slowly, knowing that one last stretch of the day remains, one final easing into rest. Where conclusions matter less than comfort. Night arrives without ceremony, as it usually does here. The air cools just enough to be noticeable, and the sounds of the village soften into a low, familiar murmur. Somewhere, someone is finishing a final task by lamplight. Somewhere else, a voice fades mid-sentence as sleep wins the argument. You lie back and realize, with a mild sense of surprise, that you haven't thought about your tooth in quite some time. When you do check in on it, carefully, experimentally, it answers with silence, or something close to silence. There's a faint awareness, like the memory of a sound after it's stopped, but no pain-demanding interpretation. This is not a dramatic cure. This is something gentler and, in its own way, more convincing. This fits a mainstream historical understanding that ancient treatments often aim for stability rather than perfection. Relief that lasts is success. Pain reduced to the point where it no longer shapes your day is victory enough. You suspect ancient healers would consider this outcome perfectly acceptable, maybe even ideal. You think back over everything that brought you here, the gritty bread, The early mornings by the Nile. The steady hands grinding ingredients. The honey warmed just enough to flow. The words spoken softly so the body could listen. None of it felt rushed. None of it promised miracles. And yet, here you are, resting comfortably. Here's one final quirky tidbit to carry with you. Honey, used so casually in ancient Egyptian medicine, is still used today in certain clinical settings for wound care. Thousands of years apart, different tools, different language, same substance, same quiet effectiveness. Some ideas simply refuse to disappear. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian dentistry should be admired for its ingenuity or simply respected for its persistence. But lying here now, jaw calm, breathing slow, you find the argument unnecessary. Whatever it was, science, belief, observation, patience, it worked well enough. Your body sinks into rest. The Nile flows on in your imagination, steady and unconcerned. Bees hum somewhere beyond time, doing what they've always done. And your tooth, finally, agrees to let the night be just the night. The world grows softer now. Thoughts stretch out, slowing their pace, losing their sharp edges. You don't need to hold on to details anymore. The tools, the texts, the debates can drift away. What remains is the feeling of being cared for, of something uncomfortable gently brought back into balance. Your breathing evens out. Each inhale feels cooler, each exhale warmer. The day fades without asking anything more of you. Ancient Egypt recedes into a calm, distant glow, lamps dimming, voices hushed, the river moving steadily under the stars. There's nothing left to solve, nothing left to endure, just rest, spreading gradually, comfortably, like warmth through linen. Sleep comes without effort now. And it's enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.